This episode of Earl Grey is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 180,000 titles for smartphone, tablet, and desktop. To get a free audiobook of your choice and help Trek FM at the same time, visit audibletrial.com/trekfm. And also by Enterprise in Space, an international program of the nonprofit National Space Society. Find out how you can help science and education and become a virtual crew member aboard the NSS Enterprise Orbiter by visiting enterpriseinspace.org.
Hi, this is Robert O'Reilly. My name is Gowron. Honor to you and your house. You're listening to Trek FM.
Tea Earl Grey hot.
Welcome to another cup of Earl Grey. I'm your host, Justin Ozer, and join with me today is Richard Marquez. Richard, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm a little tired thanks to my dog, but we're good.
Yeah, and I should mention that we're recording this in December, but when this comes out, it's January 2nd. So Happy New Year, everybody who's listening to this in the future.
Woo! It's too bad I don't have my party favors. That would be awesome.
Yeah. So, Amy's actually out this week, but we do have a special guest today that we'll be introducing in a few moments. But first, I wanted to read some feedback from the Babel Conference about our last episode. And that was about episode 206, which was favorite character moments from season 1. And listener Christopher Baca said, favorite character moments from season 1? This should be interesting to listen to. If I had to pick Picard versus Q when they are quoting Shakespeare at one another. Geordi and Troy in Arsenal of Freedom, Picard and Beverly in Arsenal of Freedom, and Riker and Data's introduction. That was before he listened, and then after he listened, he said, interesting picks. The psychological test was only referenced in the TOS episode Bread and Circuses. Another Arsenal of Freedom moment is the end when Picard acknowledges Geordi's abilities in handling command of the ship by letting him finish the mission and hand back the ship in one piece. So thanks for the feedback, Christopher. And Richard, I think Arsenal of Freedom is pretty popular for top character moments from season 1.
That seems to be, I gather that. Yeah, it was like Arsenal of Freedom.
Because we had 2 in our episode, and then he mentioned like 3 or 4 of them. So
no Code of Honor? Oh, come on, dude.
That's all you, Richard.
I'm sure it is. Yeah, I'm sure it is.
But it was interesting that he did the one with Picard and Q quoting Shakespeare at one another. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, I forgot that was in this season. So yeah. Oh, cool. Right on. Right on. Well, Alex posted, I love this idea. Such a great way to cover so many amazing moments throughout the series, and it really makes you think about each episode in a ways I usually haven't before. And I completely agree with you, Alex. Thank you for the comment. And yeah, for sure. When I was doing the research, I'm sure it's the same thing for Justin and Amy, but when I was doing the research, it made me think quite a bit about each episode and had to go through them. So thank you.
Yeah, I was definitely thinking about it in a different way when you had to pick out certain character moments instead of looking at your favorite episodes or the unsung episodes, when you're just looking at it from the moments, or even before we did the funniest moments. But just looking at the character moments in one season is great. And I think we're looking forward to doing that over the course of all 7 of the seasons, plus the 4 movies. So there's a lot more to look forward to for that.
Yes, indeedy.
Right. Excellent. So let me introduce our special guest. It's Brandy Jacala. Brandy, how are you doing today?
I am very well, Justin. Thank you for asking.
Well, it's great to have you here. As our listeners might know, you're the co-host of Live from the Edge. And recently you've done a couple of episodes of the main show of The Edge with Amy Nelson and Heather Barker. And I love those episodes, and I think they've gotten a lot of really great feedback. So if our listeners haven't heard those, I think they should really go back and listen to those, and also follow along with you and Bruce Gibson for Live from the Edge, which when this comes out will be starting up again in a couple of days.
Yes, it will. And the curious thing about that is I'm going to be in Florida at the time, so we will see if that works out for the live show.
Well, hopefully it will.
Yeah, well, see, I was planning on Discovery to come back a week later, and then they announced it was going to come back earlier, and I thought, oh, well, it's a business trip, so it's not like I can get out of it and rearrange things. So it should be fine, though. Hopefully, it's a swanky hotel where they're doing all of this, so hopefully they have really good Wi-Fi, and we should be fine.
Yeah, should be good. And I've been on Live from the Edge a couple of times and really enjoyed it. So thanks for having me on there.
Oh, it's been our pleasure. You're a lot of fun as a guest, and we appreciate it because, yeah, we can do a conversation with two people, but it's always great to have a third voice and a third opinion. So we love having guests, and thank you for being a double guest, I guess. Double guester? Double guester? Nah. You know what I mean.
Reoccurring guest.
Recurring guest. Yeah, okay. If you want to say it a boring way.
Or double guest, that's fine.
It makes it sound like he's an Oreo or something like that.
I could go so many places with that, but I won't. Okay.
Oh, moving on. Yeah. So, and this is your first time as a guest on Earl Grey, isn't it?
It is. I'm super excited.
Excellent. So, yeah, actually tell our listeners your history with Star Trek and with The Next Generation.
Well, my history with Star Trek started before I was born because my parents were Star Trek fans, and they were watching Star Trek when I was in the womb, so I was basically born into it, and I don't remember a time before Star Trek because it's just always been there. I was born in 1973, so all of the reruns were in full force at that time, and that was the best thing. And it was one of those family gathering things. Oh, Star Trek's on. Let's all get in front of the TV. And it was the same when Next Generation started. Oh, it's Sunday afternoon. Star Trek's going to be on. Everybody get in the living room. We're doing this. And we would all watch it. Even though, even the teenagers, which I was at the time, because I was 14 when that started, and my older sister was 17, and my younger sister was 13, and we all just gathered and we watched it. And so I was just so excited to have more Star Trek, and I know there were some negative viewpoints about it, but I'm just like, no, give me the Star Trek, give me the Star Trek. And I already actually knew of Patrick Stewart because of Dune, so I'm just like, hey, it's that guy. Cool. So yeah, it's just always been a part of my life, and I've watched every series, and I'm loving Discovery. I'm just happy to have Trek again. So. And I love talking about Next Gen because, awesome. Yeah, formative years there too.
Very nice. Well, it's great to have you here talking about The Next Generation, and in particular for this this episode. I think there was a list of topics that I had sent you, and the one you had picked was talking about Admiral Nechayev. So I wanted to see what caused you to select her, and thoughts and impressions that you might have had about her character, when you originally saw it, or what you think now. Just kind of overall, because we'll talk about the individual episodes in a bit.
Sure. Well, my first thought is, okay, is this another Badmiral? Because there have been a lot of Badmirals in Next Gen. Well, not a lot, but I mean, in the Star Trek universe as a whole, there have been quite a few Badmirals. And I thought, okay, now we got a lady coming in here. This is good. This is good. Please don't end up being evil. Please don't end up being evil. Those were my first thoughts when she first came on the scene, which was relatively late in the game because she didn't show up until season 6.
6, yeah.
And so I was excited to have a woman representing such a high seat of power in Starfleet. And I'll talk more about her actual character and performance as we get into the episodes. But I always really enjoyed the character and really liked her and respected the character as well. And so when you gave me that list, I'm like, oh, there's some good ones on here. But yeah, we're going with Nechayev, man. My girl, Nechayev, yeah. Let's do it.
Very nice. Yeah, and I'm excited to talk about it too. But like Richard, what were your initial impressions or kind of overall thoughts about Admiral Nechayev?
As a child, I absolutely did not like her. As a child, because like when I watched TNG for the very first time, I did not like her at all, and mainly because it was like, it was like Jellicoe coming on to the show. You know, she's very authoritative, which is fine. I'm not saying anything bad about it, but it was like it changed the whole format and whatnot, and I think that's why I didn't like her initially. But obviously, as I watched it more and more, you know, she kind of grew on me. But like, yeah, when I initially thought of her, yeah, I really did not like her. I was like, oh, great. Admiral Nechayev. I was like, and then when she came on DS9, that was even worse.
And Picard sometimes felt the same way, like, oh, she's here again. Yeah.
But, you know, it's just like any other person, you know. I mean, it's just like, you know, some days, you know, if my dad comes in and be like, oh, great, my dad's in that mood. You know, it's sort of like that thing. Sort of like, oh, great. So, yeah. But yeah, she grew on me, but I like her now.
Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like at first, like when I was first watching The Next Generation, which is much more recent than you guys, but like I was watching it and this character came in and it seemed like, and we'll talk about this, like she's in some important episodes and doing some things that Picard is uncomfortable with or that like he really doesn't want to do, but she is the person that is there like, I have my orders from Starfleet Command, Captain Picard, I'm giving you your orders. I understand your concerns. Just do it. You know, these are our orders. We need to do this. So I've come to appreciate it more, appreciate her more in subsequent rewatches. And she's definitely not a Badmiral, because for me, a Badmiral is, you know, they're corrupt or they're taken over by an alien entity. They're in it for their own power. Nechayev is, I think we'll see, pretty much always there just to make sure the chain of command is followed and the orders are carried out. So but she has to do it for difficult decisions and in such a way that sometimes people don't like it. And I think she's accepted that. Not everybody's going to like the orders that I give. So.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I totally, yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. So let's talk about, before we talk about the specific episodes, you know, I was thinking about this, like, was she the first, you know, female admiral that we saw in The Next Generation? It turns out she wasn't. There was a small role for an Admiral Hayes in Realm of Fear a few episodes before this in early season 6. But I think that was like a really small role. And because Nechayev she's on TNG 4 times and on DS9 twice, everybody knows who she is. She's really prominent. You know, quite possibly the most prominent female admiral that we get in the Prime timeline until Cornwell and Discovery, maybe. But I mean, she's a character I think everybody knows, and she's the most prominent female admiral certainly in The Next Generation.
Oh yeah, that's beyond it. Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah,
yeah,
for sure.
Oh yeah,
right. So actually, the first episode that she's in is Chain of Command Part 1, which is Season 6, Episode 10, which aired in December of 1992. And basically, in introducing this character, you know, and well, I guess to talk about Chain of Command, so, you know, that's the one where there's supposedly this threat with the Cardassians, and Picard and Crusher and Worf have to kind of have this covert operation and investigate it. Picard gets captured and tortured, which happens kind of in the second part. But in the first part, Nechayev is basically, you know, coming in and telling Picard that he's relieved of his command, right? So basically the episode starts with Nechayev being introduced, like I think right from the beginning, and she just kind of comes in, she gets down to business, and says that he's relieved of command, and then it's like roll credits because it's like, what is going on here? So like immediately she is that person that is doing something that we probably wouldn't like because we've come to really like Picard as captain. I mean, like when she first comes in that first scene, like what are your thoughts on that? Because it's very dramatic.
For sure, she's got one hell of a presence, command presence. I mean, the first things that she says before you know, when Riker comes in and introduces her, before she even says anything to Picard, she's like, "That'll be all, Commander." I'm like,
yeah.
Whoa. And you never see that. You never see someone like put in a sense, I mean, he didn't need to be put in his place, but he was like, okay, I know where I stand in this in this conversation. And it's just like, you know, in the military, that's something like, you know, it's a very strong statement to say something like that. And that's basically like, get the hell out. So, but yeah, I absolutely love the first few minutes of being introduced to this brand new character in Chain of Command. So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It's a very interesting thing, and I noticed that in all of the episodes that we're going to talk about, she's always there in person. She's not communicating with them always from her ship or from Starfleet Command or wherever. She comes in person. Oh yeah, and she doesn't seem to me to be a very tall person, and she doesn't need to be because she just exudes command, and you basically know not to mess with her at all. And she makes that very clear in those first few minutes that we meet her. And it's interesting because this episode aired in the early 90s, and I remember the early 90s very well. And I look back on my life and at the way that women in authoritative positions are received. Because, you know, you see a man in that kind of role and you're like, oh, well, he's very authoritative and commanding presence. You see a woman in that role and, oh, she's a shrew or she's a bee or, you know, one of those things. And it's like, no, it's the exact same behavior either way. So why is it different for a woman? And I think that some of that still happens today. So it's interesting that they let her go with that instead of making her all soft and sweet because she's a lady. So I appreciated the fact that she was no nonsense. She got right down to business. Let's do this, because she had to get rid of Riker and she didn't want to waste any time. She's like, time is of the essence. So I was like, get out. We got to get down to business. Sit down. I'm going to tell you what's going on. So yeah, I just really liked her. No nonsense Nechayev is what I like to call her in my head.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned that. Yeah, because I mean, she's basically down to business. And I think we've had plenty of male admirals that are like that. Nobody really says anything. It's like, oh, it's, you know, kind of a quasi-military organization. That's what you do. But people sometimes have these comments about Nechayev because she's making, you know, Picard uncomfortable or have to do things he doesn't want to do. But surely other people have asked him to do that before, you know. And what's really interesting also is, so there's this opening scene. And she says, I'm here to relieve you of command. And then there's a scene in the observation lounge where Picard isn't there. There's Nechayev and, you know, Riker and the senior staff. And like for a moment, I think the first time I saw it, I was like, is she going to take command of the ship now? Like for this mission? Like what is going on here? I mean, until they introduce Jellicoe later, but also like, you know, they talk about Jellicoe and then Riker, you know, feels like it's not necessary to give Jellicoe command, kind of implying like, hey, I'm next in line. And and she just really clearly says, you know, we need someone who has a lot of experience with the Cardassians. No offense, Commander, but that's not you. It's like, whoa. But I mean, that's exactly what she needs to do. And it turns out, I think that Jellicoe is the right person for that part of the mission, and Picard is the right person for a different part of the mission. So like, I think it's a really strong introduction of who she is. That she just gets down to business and wants to accomplish things, and she doesn't care like who it is. If they're not right for the mission, they're just not going to do it. So,
yeah,
and she tells it how it is, and that's what I absolutely love. Those very first moments that we get to see here is that we see, you know, she means business. She wants. Obviously, it's a very heightened situation anyway. I mean, they're about to go to war if it does happen, and you need to be ready. And in a sense, you need to have one of your best commanders that basically have a just as loud of a bark as she does. And that shows it with Jellicoe, because he's very on point on getting everything done and whatnot. So yeah, I mean, for sure, he continued the pace that Nechayev had already set. So yeah.
And in this episode, I mean, she just has a small part after that observation lounge scene where she's talking to Jellicoe on the monitor about what's going on. But yeah, it's like a really strong kind of memorable introduction and important two-parter. And I think it's interesting, like a lot of these are part of like two-part episodes. A lot of them have to do with Cardassians. I mean, there's like all of this kind of important stuff that they're And some of them, they're setting up things for Deep Space Nine or Voyager. And she's,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they brought her in a lot of important episodes. They're not going to bring her in like Sub Rosa or something like that, right?
Yeah, that was actually one of our options of what to do for this podcast. And I thought, how on earth could we rewrite that so that it is palatable to anyone?
We might do it someday.
Completely scrap it and write a new story is basically all I could think of.
But they always had her doing like important thing. I mean, I think as we'll see, important roles, important episodes. It's not just like a throwaway thing. So I appreciate that a lot, the way that they were kind of, building her character. So
Yeah, that's very obvious when you see the rest of the episodes, and basically watch them all together, because that's what I did to just refresh my memory. And I just thought, wow, well, she's always there in person. She knows how to get things done. So yeah, it just made me actually really love the character even more rewatching those episodes.
Yeah, and not only like when to get things done, but she also knows to convey that importance of what it is, and you feel it. Oh yeah, you totally feel it.
You really feel it, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's one of those things where I feel like, well, with the whole Jellicoe thing, I feel like that he actually knew he was only going to have temporary command, but he wasn't about to act like it was a temporary command, because he needed everybody to fall in line. And yeah, nobody likes Jellicoe at first, but I love Ronnie Cox, so I was just like, yeah, Ronnie.
I've come to appreciate Jellicoe. He's also somebody that needs to do what needs to be done. But I don't know, like, whether he thinks that he's going to be temporarily in command, because at one point he's talking to Picard and he's like, I don't think you have a good chance of coming back, but good luck. Like almost like he thinks maybe he will be in command of the Enterprise more permanently if he doesn't make it back. So, but anyway, they're kind of interesting, because there's like this strong admiral kind of pushing things along, and there's this strong Captain Jellicoe that's kind of pushing things along within the same episode, and it's really interesting to kind of see that. But it is interesting also that Jellicoe is somebody that a lot of people have trouble with too. So
yeah, I don't anymore. I don't anymore. I can appreciate the character and what he's trying to do, and it is absolutely true that he was the right person for the job, and Nechayev knew exactly what she was doing. So yeah. He was the right person to negotiate that treaty. Just, ooh, wow. Because really, honestly, how would a Picard have gotten to that same end result? I just don't know if he could have in the same way, because the Cardassians are a different kettle of fish, if you'll forgive the pun. They're kind of fishy, a little bit like invertebrates. But yeah, I just don't know how that would have worked out with Picard doing that, because you can't always solve every single problem with nice diplomacy. Sometimes you have to have someone like Jellicoe there to make them wait for a stupid amount of time, to make them think you're a loose cannon and are just going to pop off at any time. Sometimes you need that. It's just a fact of life. But yeah, so he was the right person.
He pushes them to get all their defenses and all the systems in the ship to get ready, and it's driving them crazy, but they kind of need it.
But they do it. They do it. They're capable of it. He knows they're capable of it, and so it gets done. That's all there is to it.
And that actually bothers me now. Now that we're talking about that, it's so obviously they run a starship. They know the dangers of being in space and whatnot, and yet they can't like up the pace a little bit. I mean, that just further enforces the. I know Ken's gonna love this, and same thing with Zach. But it further enforces that the fact that the Enterprise D is a cruise liner. So, I mean, well, no, not taking away from any of the workers that work at cruise liners, because I know they work hard.
Yes, they do, very hard.
But I'm just saying the employees, as in the officers of the Enterprise, are on a cruise.
Yeah, well, their mission isn't war. Their mission is exploration. So they do come into conflict. Neither is a cruise ship either. Yeah.
Yet they work hard.
Yeah, that's true. But they... But at the same time, I feel like, yeah, I understood both sides of that conflict, because suddenly they're being asked to do stuff that, yeah, they could have done in a normal, relaxed amount of time, but he needed it done immediately. And so he demanded that it be done immediately, and it got done. So that doesn't mean they always are going to run a ship that way, but in a crisis situation, now they know that they have what it takes to get these things done faster than they ever thought possible. So I think he made left things a little better than when he found them, like he tells Picard when Picard comes back.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I know we kind of took a sidetrack a little bit to talk about Jellicoe, but I mean,
he's a big part of the episode too.
But he's a big part of the episode, and actually, the orders that put him in command are signed by Nechayev. So it's really she's kind of putting that into effect that Jellicoe is the one that's in command of the Enterprise. So, I mean, like, even though she just has a couple of scenes, in a lot of these episodes, just a couple of scenes, she's doing things that kind of kick things off in a certain direction and affect like the rest of the episode or the rest of the two-parter. So.
Yeah.
Interesting to see. All right. Should we move on to the second appearance?
Sure.
Okay. So she was, Admiral Nechayev was next in Descent, Part 1, which was the 26th episode of Season 6, aired in June of 1993. So that's the one about the Borg. They've been influenced by Hugh. They're kind of individuals, and Lore is kind of in command of this group of Borg that wants to kind of rid the galaxy of organic beings. Maybe that, I don't know if that's a good summary, but then Lore convinces Data to join them. But her role in this episode is that there are these kind of Borg attacks that are going on. And you're right, she comes in person. She likes to come in person, doesn't she?
She does every time. Every single time.
To see Picard. I mean, it's kind of a short scene because there's a captain's log where Picard says, that Starfleet sent Nechayev to take command in the sector. So they have, a conversation about, all the starships that are going to be in the sector, and that she'll have a certain flagship. And but I think the important part, even in that short scene, is that she questions him about Hugh. And Hugh was the Borg that they came across who kind of became an individual, and Picard decided not to basically commit genocide with the Borg and wipe them out, but to kind of send individuality to them and hope that things would get better for the Borg, or it would affect them in some way that didn't eradicate everybody. But Nechayev really takes a hard line with him about it and says that he could have, rid the Federation of a mortal enemy. And if there's an opportunity for him to do that in the future, he has to take it, and I think it weighs on him. She's just in that short scene, but it weighs on him, later in the episode when he's like, did I make the wrong decision? I don't know. What do you think about, this appearance and bringing that back up about the decision he made about Hugh?
I love continuity. And I love it done well. And this episode does it well because, they could have just, written the rest of that off and just said, oh, okay, Hugh goes back to the Borg and is absorbed into the collective, and they brainwash him and now he's just a Borg again. They could have done that so many ways, but no, they brought the fruits of Picard's labors to bear, and it isn't necessarily a good thing. And that's the thing about life in general and about making decisions about other people's lives. And it's like, you can do what's moral, but is it the right thing to do? And Picard is really struggling with that. And I understand Nechayev's position because, yes, she reviewed all of the logs and everything about the situation, and all that she was able to see was that they could have put an end to their biggest enemy. And granted, the Borg are scary as heck because they adapt and they're virtually unstoppable for a while.
Well, they don't seem to send multiple ships, though.
Yeah. They don't seem to do that, probably because they're all over the universe doing other things. Yeah. But they're still all. But
they are still a scary adversary.
They're a very scary adversary until Voyager. But that's another story. So, but I can understand that hardline view because she wasn't there. Had she been there, had she watched that changes happen in Hugh, she might have had a different opinion. But she wasn't there. She's never going to have that experience, and so she is thinking about the future of Starfleet, the Federation, humanity, other races, etc. That's what her job is to protect everybody. And that's what she's doing with these statements. So it's not like she's being unfeeling or anything like that, but she's got bigger fish to fry.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah. And I'm glad that someone like you see someone like that in the command structure that's thinking like that. I mean, obviously, yeah, rid the Borg of the Federation, or rid the Federation of the Borg, but like at the same time, it's like she's got to deal with all those deaths that happen that will happen under her command. I'm pretty sure that's also another thought in the character's mind as well. And yeah, I probably would have said the same thing because you have a chance to just rid this and keep us. I mean, the Vulcans, or I'm sorry, the Romulans and the Klingons are one thing and nuisance, and at the same time, but at least they're not banding together and not a formidable foe like the Borg are. So, but as we found out in DS9 later on,
well, I mean, I have a different point of view about it, and I think I found when I've expressed it, it's not that popular point of view. I think that what Picard did by not, doing something in a way to send Hugh back to destroy all of the Borg, I think it was actually the right thing to do because, like, if in order for your civilization to survive, you need to completely destroy another one and basically commit genocide, then, what is the point of what you're doing in your civilization? That's just my point of view. I know it's probably not a popular one in this context that we're talking about in Star Trek, but like for me, I really appreciate that episode. I think it was Iborg and the things that it looked at, and I probably would have made the same decision that Picard did, holding out hope. Because I mean, you talk about the Borg and they're this collective, but they're made up of individuals who at one point or another were part of a lot of different civilizations, and they've been forced to be a part of this. So if there's any chance to be able to at some point break that and liberate them, me personally, I'd rather take that chance than trying to have my own civilization continue by completely destroying another one. So
no, I totally agree with you on that, because my personal feeling will always be that Picard did the right thing. However, that is not necessarily what the right thing is perceived to be by everyone in Starfleet.
Sure.
So there's different perceptions of right and wrong there. But I would have done the same thing in his place. I could not eradicate an entire species in that way. It's again, we would lose our own humanity by doing that, so to speak. I know that Starfleet is made up of more than humans.
Humanoidanity, maybe?
There we go. We would lose our own humanoidanity. So, yeah, I agree with you on that point. And if it's an unpopular view, then people can just write angry comments. I don't know. It's just...
It's just something that I put forward before in certain groups, and people are like, nope, I would have eradicated those Borg.
No,
I don't think that's an I don't think that's a negative... What did you say? Unpopular?
Yeah.
Unpopular view. Because, I mean... Realistic, I mean, like, see, here's the deal. So here's how I'm seeing it. So Picard made a moral decision, and we need more people in something in like a frontline military units and stuff like that to question the higher ups and say, hey, do you really think that this is what we're supposed to be doing? And that's kind of what, I mean, obviously he probably already had standing orders. If you have an opportunity to kill or do a crippling blow to the Borg or anyone that we're currently war at, I'm sure that's exactly what that it was already out there. But at the same time, he did what was morally and ethical as a person and to blindly just, go out there and completely eradicate an entire race or the possibility is just not human.
It's not. It's not humanoidal.
Yeah, I mean,
Exactly. And then just to piggyback off of what you were saying about the Borg, about that they were forced into, it's like, yeah, it's slavery basically in a sense, and those people deserve to be freed from. I mean, it's not like they're cyborgs or anything like that, but like, yeah, it's just like, yeah, I mean, they're people too, so yeah, that are just trapped because they can't get out.
Yeah, and I had actually taken that same line of thought, Justin. It's like, okay, these people are from species across the galaxy, and none of them asked for this. None of them wanted this, and we're just going to eradicate them?
Technically, they're not a species.
Yeah,
they're a culture. I would say they're a culture.
Yeah,
Been forced to be
they're
part of that culture.
Yeah, but there are many other species within that have been assimilated to become part of the Borg. So, but yeah, it's I would still have made, but I'm a big old softie, and I will choose to not harm people if I have that option. So
yeah,
I think yes, Picard did the moral thing, and in my mind it was the right thing. But I also understand Nechayev and Starfleet's point of view as well. So.
And she's also got a job to do, which is to protect the Federation, and that's his job too. But I mean, it's more dire on her than it is on him. So,
yes, very much so. She's under a lot more pressure.
And, and it's interesting. I think we see in some of these episodes, like Nechayev has her orders. She's going to, tell Picard what needs to be done from Starfleet Command. But then, Picard is the one to actually, be not on the ground really, but like to be. I don't know, maybe that's the right way to put it.
The front line?
At the front line, yeah, actually having to carry those things out, he has to wrestle with it in a way that Starfleet Command might not, or an admiral might not. And I think what's interesting in Descent is that, later on when Picard is thinking about this and talking with Riker, Riker says sending Hugh back to the Borg was a very dangerous choice, but it was the moral thing to do. And Picard says it may turn out the moral thing to do was not the right thing to do. So he's really like wrestling with this and questioning himself in a way that maybe he hasn't since that happened the year before. And it's kind of, I don't know if they get back to like if he resolves that for himself, whether it was the right thing to do or not. But also saying something like, may turn out the moral thing to do is not the right thing to do sounds very much to me like a Deep Space Nine kind of thing. And I think because DS9 was going on at this point, there are these kind of more complex moral gray area kind of things going on in the later seasons.
I agree, because sometimes there is no one right answer. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you have to make a choice between what everyone thinks is right and what you know is right and what you know is moral. And those are not easy decisions to make. And, it's good to have a character like Picard that has that high sense of morality to wrestle with these things and come to his decision. Because, anyone who blindly follows orders without question, they might make a good soldier, but they're never going to make a good leader.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much so. And it's very blurry from the top. It really is.
Yes, so really blurry, so blurry.
I mean, and it reminded me of that episode with Captain Maxwell saying, all those brass don't know what's going on down here in the sense of the wilderness. It's true.
The Wounded. Really I was just watching that before we started recording.
Thank you. I just couldn't remember the name of the episode. I was like, I know it's Captain Maxwell on the Phoenix, but I was like, what is that episode name?
Yeah, it is really interesting to think about those things.
Yeah,
right.
Totally.
So let's go on to the third appearance of Admiral Nechayev. That's Journey's End, Season 7, Episode 20. Aired in March 1994. And Journey's End is basically the
Wesley episode.
I know you don't like Wesley, but it's more than that. And we're actually going to focus on a different part of it, right? But I mean, I think the real crux of the episode, besides what's going on with Wesley, is that there's this treaty that's been signed with the Cardassians. Again, an episode with Cardassians. And there's been a treaty, and there's some worlds, some Cardassian worlds that are currently in Federation space, some Federation worlds in Cardassian space. And there's a Federation world in Cardassian space, and Nechayev is ordering Picard to move those people, and they're Native American people that had originally come from Earth a couple hundred years before, and they have to move. And Picard, is having this discussion, and these. He's having a real hard time with it because, of course, there is this history of Native American peoples being, removed some hundreds of years before, and it's like they're doing it again. There's a distant government, and they're not going to be able to kind of do what they want, and he kind of really wrestles with this. I think what's really interesting in this one, when she gets introduced, is that previously there had been, this tension in some of the other episodes when, and he specifically makes tea in her favorite canapes and
Valerian canapes.
Valerian canapes.
Sounds yummy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I'll take one.
I mean, so she comes into the room. She tells Riker to leave, of course.
But he's used to it by then. He's just like,
he's
bye.
like, all right.
He was already on his way out the door.
Yep.
See you later. And so she starts saying we've worked out these things with the Cardassians, and I think it just stops her in her tracks. Like, are those Valerian canapes? He's like, yeah, I found out the kind that you like, and she's like, oh, that was really thoughtful. And I think that's interesting because it's the first time where she's kind of getting out of that official role and being like, oh, you did a thoughtful thing for me. Let me just take a moment and stop and, enjoy your hospitality. So I kind of like that about her character, that she can, I think over the course of some of these appearances, even though there's only 4 of them, they get to know each other better, and it becomes a little more informal, and I think in this one he still struggles with what she's telling him to do, but there's not quite as much tension in the first part of it.
Yeah, there's not. The thing that I love is that she just marches right in, and he gets out, I think, as far as, would you like? And then she just starts in. And then I love how just in mid-sentence, and her back is to him, and she just stops and turns around and realizes that they're Valerian canapes. And then she sits down and they have a conversation because somebody took notice of her as a person and not just an admiral. And he did say that he had asked her aid for, what was her favorite food, etc., something that he could connect with her on to make her feel welcome on the Enterprise. And it worked. It worked really well, I think. And yes, she had come to give him very difficult orders that she makes it pretty apparent, I think, in later conversations that she doesn't agree with either, but she has her orders.
Yeah, I think even in the initial conversation that they're having, so they're talking about this situation, and she's saying, well, one of the representatives was included as part of the discussions. We considered their objections, and they were ultimately rejected. And so she's trying to kind of, and I think you even see when she's talking about it in the episode that she is sympathetic to the difficulties he's wrestling with, and even says that she made some of the arguments he's making about this to the Federation Council, but they've rejected it, and now it's time to carry out these orders. So she's not just somebody that's like, here's your orders, go do it. I don't even care what you think. She does care, and I think she listens to what he has to say, and she's like, I feel the same way, and I told them this was a problem because of this, and this, but we have our orders now. Let's carry them out, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even
or at least it was going to start like that before she noticed the canapes.
That's true. I mean, I guess he got her with that gesture to kind of open up a little bit more and actually give some hints that she doesn't quite agree with it either, but it's what they have to do. So. I don't know. Yeah,
and she even says later, because he's talking to her again on the view screen, and he says, Admiral, can't you talk to Starfleet Command? And she said, I did, 2 hours ago. It's not that she hasn't kept trying, because she has. And she makes that clear to him. It's just, it's one of those situations that has no good, right answer that's going to come about. And so they have to find a different resolution.
I really didn't have anything more to add to what you guys were saying, because you guys were hitting all the points that I was already thinking. Just one of the things that I really like about this episode is that you actually finally get to see her tone it down from being that strict military leader to a very nice person. But I was going to ask, Brandy, do you think that her being, being the assertive person that she is, and then going in there basically guns blazing with Picard, that it's a representation of females back then that were assertive, like what we were talking about earlier,
like in the real world in the 1990s,
right?
Okay,
yeah, because women had to work 2 to 3 times as hard to get to the same level of authority that men did, and unfortunately often still do. And even when they get to that level of authority, they will be, if they show any kind of emotion or weakness, they will be attacked. And so I think that plays a lot into that representation of her character earlier on, because that's the way the world was. Now, granted, this is supposed to be the idyllic future where everybody's equal and all of that, but in the original series, women couldn't be starship captains. So things of the time are still reflected in this idyllic future. And I think that was one of them, that women can't show any weakness, or else, someone will think, oh, well, she's just being an emotional woman. She's being hysterical. She's being this or that, when that has absolutely nothing to do with anything. So.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what's interesting about that opening scene in Journey's End is that Picard makes a gesture, and she's like, "Oh, I'm going to take that gesture and see if maybe that'll help us to work together." I'm not sure if he hadn't made that gesture, if she would have, but it affects some of the things that she says and how she says them. And even at the end of that scene, she says, "Thank you for making me welcome," because it's probably such a rare thing that anybody would do something thoughtful like that. They're like, "Oh, the Admiral's here. They're going to give me some orders I don't like, and I'm just going to bear with it and until they leave." But clearly Picard's thought about it, and he makes this gesture, and she accepts. I just like that a lot, because it adds to her character. Because when you see like a character in Star Trek and they're all just about like, I'm a tough person, I'm giving orders, go. And you don't see them as a real person, because not everybody's like that 24 hours a day, right? They have their moments when they can appreciate certain things. And I like that we're seeing that side, even though these are short scenes, these are fairly short appearances. So,
well, and it also shows. I mean, not to take away from being the time that it is, especially for a female being in a high position like Nechayev was, or is, I guess you could say. But
Nechayev's eternal.
Maybe
yeah, there you go.
will be in 350 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. There you go. Will be. There you go. I like that. But like, I mean, it's not. It's also a military culture too. I mean, and then it's actually not even just military culture. It's also work. It's probably a little bit more stressful when it comes to the military. But like, when you have a higher ranking officer, or even you're a higher ranking enlisted, of course you're gonna act differently, and it's gonna be a little bit higher tense. And I guess, like you said, make it. I mean, I guess I'm talking in circles now with you, but like, I'm just saying like. That she is an actual person, and before she was an admiral, she was probably a captain and all that kind of stuff, just like anyone else. So yeah.
If only they did the corporations of today the same way. You had to actually rise through the ranks instead of, oh, let's hire this guy for our CEO. No. He didn't work in that company. No.
He has to start packing the boxes first before you can move up to be the CEO.
And
exactly.
I totally agree with that.
They should all know what it's like at the lowest rung of that company. They should work there in that lower area where they consider them to be, I don't know what, parasites, peons, whatever. It's just like, no, these are the people that make your money for you, buddy. So, sorry. Got off track.
I know what that feels like. Right on.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that is one good thing about Star Trek, because you do see that, like, even if someone is an admiral, they're like the highest ranking person, they were a cadet once, a long time ago, and they were an ensign, a lieutenant, a commander, a captain, all that stuff, and they've moved through over the years, so they can have an appreciation, I think, when they're giving I think when Nechayev is giving these orders to Picard, that she probably has an appreciation, like, when I was a captain, there was some admiral giving me orders I didn't like either. So, and I think that's why I think she's kind of sympathetic to certain things. Like, I understand, I made that argument, it was rejected. So I understand where you're coming from, but you've got to do this for me. And I'd like to see that, like a Captain Nechayev series. That'd be quite interesting.
Ooh, nice prequel. I'm in. I like it.
But yeah, like, we don't think about that sometimes. Like, oh, there's this admiral and they're giving these orders and it's a real pain for Picard. But they've done all this stuff before.
Yeah, and exactly. It's different in the military than it is in a civilian chain of command. Yeah, they have to have made it through. Unless, no, even still, you start at the bottom for an officer. I mean, technically you're not private, but I mean, in a sense, in the officer ranks, you kind of are. Mm-hmm. So. Yeah.
Well, then how do we explain Kirk going from cadet to captain in one movie in the 2009 Star Trek?
Things work differently in that other timeline. I don't think that
we don't live in that timeline.
Prime timeline.
That's why.
Yeah. I mean, it is one of those things where you're like, I don't think it's realistic that would happen. But
Brandy's taking a stab at TOS.
No,
he's taking a stab at the Kelvin timeline.
I'm taking a stab at the Kelvin timeline.
But still, the standard orbit guys talk about the Kelvin. I like the Kelvin timeline a lot, and I love the first and third movies especially. But there is something unrealistic where it's like, you were just a cadet and here's a ship. But
yeah, it's just like, and you spent like a part of the movie not even on the ship. You got thrown off onto an ice planet where Spock conveniently was and Scotty conveniently was, and anyway, sorry.
I mean, Nero messed up all that stuff. What can I say?
Yeah, you know what? It's okay. It's okay, because if were it not for the Kelvin timeline, I don't think that we would have had something as great as Discovery, because it reinvigorated interest in Star Trek, and I can't fault them for that at all. I did enjoy the third movie a lot.
I really enjoyed the third movie. I love all three of them. I love them all.
Well, I mean, it's the reason that I'm here. If it wasn't for the 2009 movie, I wouldn't have had my interest in Star Trek rekindled to try to.
There you
all
go.
On my phone.
There you go.
Okay.
See? So there is, whether you like the movies or not, you cannot argue that they did not have a massive impact on the reinvigoration of Star Trek.
Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, exactly.
Nobody can argue that they didn't have an impact, so.
Every time I ran into someone, if I had my Star Trek shirt, I usually got run into like older people, quite a few years older than me, and and then when 2009 happened, it's like I can't believe I'm going to say this. I got kids basically, not like kids, like 20-year-olds, and I can't believe I'm at that age where I'm about to start saying that now. But like
Richard,
you got these kids. I know, right?
Yes.
I'm the old man.
No, if they're young enough that I could have been their mother, then they're a kid to me. So.
Okay, so maybe not a 20-year-old, but
no, 20. No, I'm 44. So, 20-year-old,
okay.
yeah, I could definitely be the mother of a 20-year-old. I have many friends who are mothers of 20-year-olds.
So yeah, and I absolutely love it. Because when 2009 came out, I absolutely hated it the first time, and then I watched it a couple times, and then my view didn't change. But when I ran into someone that was like, "Oh, you're a fan of Star Trek? Oh, I love this start," and it sparked off this whole conversation, and he had no idea that there was this whole entire television show that happened way back into the past, way before him and I were born. Oof. And him and I talk here and there. It's amazing on how much he's gotten out of it. So I can't fault 2009, unfortunately, J.J. Abrams, for rejuvenizing our
I like rejuvenizing. That's great. Let's use that from now on. It's not rejuvenating, it's rejuvenizing. Sounds so much better, actually. Let's do it.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Yes, thank you, Richard.
Yeah, but definitely, I mean, it's good when people come in all kinds of different ways and they can look back at what's come before.
Yeah.
Should we go on to the next one?
Yeah.
Sir.
I actually have a question for you guys about which one you want to do next, because Nechayev was on 4 episodes of TNG and 2 episodes of DS9, and actually the next episode of TNG came after the first episode of DS9 that she was on. So I'll leave it up to you which you want to talk about first.
So chronological or...
Chronological and air date. The DS9 one is first.
Well, then let's talk about the DS9 one. Let's go with the air date and the chronology. So.
All right. So, yes, we're a TNG podcast, but we'll talk about DS9 a bit here because, I think it rounds out what you see in the arc of her character as well.
Yes.
All right. So...
Dang it, we're crossing the streams.
I thought you said crossing the streams was bad.
It is
I'm
bad.
okay with it for Star Trek. But
the world.
So the last one that we had talked about was Journey's End, which aired in March of 1994. But then before Nechayev's last TNG appearance, she was on Deep Space Nine in the Maquis Part 2, which was Season 2, Episode 21, aired May 1st, 1994. So again, another two-parter like Descent and Chain of Command where Nechayev appears. And I guess just briefly to talk about the Maquis two-parter. The Maquis are making some trouble, and Sisko needs to do something about it. Does that kind of sum it up?
Yeah, that's pretty well sums it up. And in part 2, Sisko has one of the greatest rants of all time.
Yes. I was definitely going to talk about that because it's inspired by Nechayev, right?
Yeah, it is. It's just, yeah.
But like the interesting thing is the Maquis kind of has its origins in Journey's End, which we just talked about, and all the stuff that goes on in Dorvan 5. And then, later on, like less than 2 months later, there is a DS9 two-parter about the Maquis. And basically, in the first part, Sisko's had to try to figure out what's going. I think there's a freighter that explodes Deep Space Nine, and they have to investigate. And he finds out that his old buddy Cal Hudson has kind of left Starfleet for the Maquis. I think that's what he finds out at the end of the first part. And then, Sisko comes back and he's going to have to deal with all of these implications. And he's talking to Dax and saying, "Oh, I want to talk to Starfleet." Well, Admiral Nechayev's already here, Dax says. So there she is, just showing up again, unannounced this time. And she's going to, talk with Sisko. And it is a really interesting conversation because, so far we've seen, those 3 interactions with Picard where it's been kind of tense but it's kind of gotten a little better with Journey's End a little bit. And then she's going to talk with Sisko, and we've never seen her talk with Sisko before. And Sisko, I think, is a very different kind of captain, the way that he deals with things.
Well, is he a captain?
He's a commander at this point.
Commander.
You're right.
Yeah.
Sorry. Second
That's
season.
okay. He's still in command of the station.
Yeah, he's still in command of the station.
Yeah.
But,
right, but the difference between the two, there is a huge difference. You may be like commander, but like the power of a captain or even an admiral is still quite a bit. So
yeah.
They kind of had to.
Yeah. Well, it's just so weird to me because it's just like, really, we're gonna start this series with the commander not being a captain?
Well, I know. We can talk about that more another time because I could have a long conversation about that.
I just always thought that was weird, but then I'm a socially conscious, annoying person, so there we go.
We'll pass the orb to the orb.
It is a little bit.
Yeah.
But,
hey, Chris, when are you going to have me on the orb, buddy? Because I got plenty to talk about.
So
ring, ring, ring. Hello.
So Nechayev comes to Sisko's office on Deep Space Nine, and one of the things that happened before was Gul Dukat was kidnapped by the Maquis, and she's just letting Sisko know that the Central Command's on alert. And then she puts in this thing like, the security chief of yours, the shapeshifter. Oh, you mean Odo? And it's like, wouldn't you be better off with a Starfleet officer heading your security team? So immediately she's starting by like questioning what he's doing. And just in that first part of the conversation, what do you guys think about that? Just kind of like they have this situation going on and she's going to question, the basically the head of security that he has in place.
I kind of feel like it was not inferring you should replace him, because if she thought that he should be replaced, she would have just said so. She was finding out how Sisko felt about Odo, what his qualifications were. She was fishing, basically. She was on a fishing expedition. Because she didn't say it as a command. She just said, wouldn't it be better if, as if to make him think about that choice. So I felt she was just on a fishing expedition to see what Sisko actually thought about Odo and his capabilities and his loyalties.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Richard.
Well, I was just gonna say, it was more to me. It sounded like more like a suggestive order, and put it basically like you said, putting a seed in his mind, saying, "Well, don't you think you should do it this way?" Probably towards regulations or something like that. Because I think he doesn't quote the regulations that there has to be a Federation security officer in order to handle Federation matters.
Not in this one. I think they talk about that in later DS.
Okay,
episodes.
But
the way that I took it was like, okay, so we've seen Nechayev, talking with Picard and in different sectors, and now something's happened on Deep Space Nine that takes the Federation's attention, and Bajor and Deep Space Nine aren't part of the Federation. So I think what she's saying is there's this important Federation matter, and we don't have a Starfleet head of security here. I want your assurance that I can trust this person will handle the situation. And I mean, she basically gets that assurance, because I think she's looking like at each step of it just to kind of see, like, do we have the right team in place? Is everything secure here? So I kind of took it, I think Sisko takes it as very confrontational, but I took it as she's just trying to make sure all of the, right people are in the right place, and that there isn't any kind of problem, right?
Exactly. Mm-hmm. She doesn't want to find out later on that the security officer was helping the Maquis or something. So she's just basically finding out about Odo, and she does, and that's the last you hear of it, because she's satisfied with what she found out.
Yeah, although of course later you get Eddington, but
I don't want to talk about Eddington.
Let's talk about it.
Hero of DS. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. No, but
don't make me come and punch you, Richard.
But it has implications later. But like, what's interesting is, so they keep, after she talks about that, they keep talking about what's going on with the Cardassians, and Sisko says there's a bigger issue, which is the Maquis. And she just says, they're a bunch of irresponsible hotheads. But Sisko thinks this is a real problem. And then she says, we never should have allowed those colonists to remain on the Cardassian side of the demilitarized zone. So that's I think a direct reference to what happens in Journey's End, where at the end they have to have kind of a compromise where it's like, okay, if you are okay with staying on the Cardassian side, you can do that. But I think she's regretting that they couldn't kind of force the issue and force them out like she had originally gotten orders for. Mm-hmm. So she has, I think, some regrets that I don't think she isn't in the end of Journey's End when they make that compromise, but I think it's clear they've talked to Starfleet. Maybe Picard's talked to her. And they've come
they
to
would
this
have had
compromise.
to have. Yeah, they would have had to talk to Starfleet.
But I think it's interesting. Like, she's seeing this new. Well, I don't know if she's never seen Sisko before, but I mean, it kind of seems like it. And she's admitting these regrets to him. And then she asks him about, Hudson and what his analysis is. And Sisko has this really uncomfortable look, like, I'll have to ask him. Like, he knows that he's basically left Starfleet and is part of the Maquis, but he's kind of lying to Nechayev that he knows anything about it, right?
Yeah. Well, we all know what she would have basically said about it is like, okay, I know he's your friend, but now he's the enemy because he's siding with the Maquis. They're causing unrest. They're taking us to the brink of war, and you have to do something about this. So we know what she would have said. That's why he fudged the truth a bit.
Yeah, because she would have been like, okay, hunt him down right now.
Yeah, exactly. Which is basically what he does. I mean, he does go find him. He kind of does do that. Yeah. But like, okay, so I guess the last part of this is that it seems like, from what Sisko is saying, that
he's saying the Cardassians aren't honoring their part of the treaty. And she's like, are you questioning Federation policy? And he's just like, I know that the situation is deteriorating rapidly. And then Nechayev basically gives him his orders like, you're overstating the problem. Just establish a dialogue. I'm sure they'll listen to reason. Good luck. And she just like leaves the office, right? But I think that's part of her style. It's just like, you need to just do something about this situation. I need you to handle it. And then he does go into his rant like, the trouble is Earth, and it's easy to be a saint in paradise, which is one of like probably the best speeches in all of Star Trek. But she's like the inspiration to make him angry about this, and like, people don't understand us on the frontier kind of thing, right?
Yeah, and I don't know. I kind of get the feeling like she knew exactly what kind of reaction he was going to have to what she was saying. And
she knew he was going to have like a little rant in front of Kira afterwards.
Yeah, no, I think that she just knew. I think she was influencing his actions by being a little passive aggressive. Mm-hmm. So basically saying what she knew anyone, any admiral would say in the situation. Oh, I'm sure they'll listen to reason, knowing it would drive him nuts. But it would also get the situation solved. She didn't tell him, she said, yes, establish a dialogue. I'm sure they'll listen to reason. She didn't say anything else beyond that. So she basically was leaving it up to him as how to handle it and lighting a fire under his bum to get it done by making him angry.
Interesting. I hadn't actually thought of it like that, but...
That's how I thought of it, but, that may not be how the general populace thinks about it, so...
Interesting. Well... I want to also ask, like, in this first appearance, like, what are your thoughts on her interaction with Sisko versus how she interacts with Picard?
Well, I think that her interactions with Sisko are not nearly as abrupt as when she first started interacting with Picard, because she has, I don't want to say she has softened a bit, because it's not about being softer. It's about trying to look at the situation from another point of view. But in the end, she still has her orders, because she's not the end all and be all of Starfleet. So she has her orders, and she has to give other people their orders as well. So, but she knows that, I feel like she knows that DS9 operates in a much different way than any other Starfleet base. And so she went in with an adjusted attitude so as not to just immediately alienate Sisko.
What do you think, Richard?
So I saw... Okay, so if we're going to compare the interactions between Sisko and Picard, Picard, to me, is a very experienced captain, and he weighs more when it comes to, like, experience. When it comes in, maybe Nechayev doesn't have quite as much experience. Maybe she has about the same, but she feels intimidated by the fact that he is the captain of the flagship, basically, and is doing all these great deeds and whatnot. So when it comes to, like, Sisko, the way I think that she or the character is portrayed is that he's inexperienced, but she also knows he's also intelligent and enough to figure something out, like this kind of problem. The Maquis has the problem, and that because he's lower experienced but intelligent, she doesn't have to be that assertive sort of kind of person, or at least that's how I saw. That's how I saw her interaction, because she was like, she wasn't very forceful like she was with Picard. So
that's interesting, because I saw her as actually more forceful with Sisko, to the point that he got really angry about it.
But she didn't have to push his buttons very hard. That's why I'm saying, like, being inexperienced or being experienced, you know where your limitations are. You already know what kind of commander you are, or even leader at that time. I mean, as an example, I'm more calmer now than I ever was when I was in my 20s about certain issues. Like if someone was doing something like this to me, like pushing my buttons or on something like that. But like it's the same thing with Sisko. Sisko's way less experienced than Picard, because like I think his first command was his first commander job basically was the Saratoga, and he lost in battle, and ever since then he's been on Mars until Deep Space Nine. So
well, I mean, clearly Picard is a good deal older.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and he's been through quite a bit.
Yeah. Huh, interesting.
I mean, he almost killed the entire human race.
Almost. Just almost is the key
Almost.
word there. Almost.
Yeah, until he went to sleep.
No, until he told Data to put the Borg to sleep. So really,
Exactly,
he
that's what I'm saying.
saved all of humanity and humanoidal beings.
Well, he killed like
No,
11,000
it was a
people,
conversation
but-
Justin and I had about
Oh,
it.
I see. I apologize.
Sorry.
Yeah.
No,
Oh,
you're
that's
fine.
okay.
There's no reason to apologize. It's all good.
So, all right. So that was her first appearance on Deep Space Nine. But then, a little less than 2 weeks later, in Preemptive Strike, which is season 7, episode 24 of The Next Generation, aired on May 14th, 1994. Also one about the Maquis, and basically that's the one where Ro gets promoted to lieutenant and has an undercover mission with the Maquis, and then becomes one of them. So
One of us.
One of us. One of us.
so like okay, so there's only like a couple episodes after Journey's End, and there's just like a little short interaction in this episode, so we may not talk about it for a little bit, but I love that as soon as Nechayev comes into the room to meet with Picard about, you know, this Maquis situation, she's like, "No Balerian canapes this time, Captain."
But still tea.
But he still has tea. But like, I mean, what's really interesting is like, so she's kind of teasing him about this, and he's like giving back. He said, "I thought twice." It was kind of pushing it a little. So they're actually, it's like a little bit different. I noticed like the body language is a little bit different. They're like sitting on the same, I guess, couch in his ready room instead of, you know, being formally across a desk, and they have like this kind of back and forth. So I think what the gesture Picard made before has made it so that they're, you know, even like a little bit more informal and kind of understanding, and I think really, you know, have each other's respect. So it's like over time you really see her interaction with Picard change, and yeah, I mean, and then, you know, once they have that kind of back and forth, they're just kind of talking about the situation, you know, honestly about what's going on and how difficult it is. And, you know, it ends with her saying like, "Oh, we think we have someone that can infiltrate the Maquis," and then it cuts to Ro doing that. But it seems like much, you know, less tense and more collaborative kind of at this point. Like, I know it's a short scene, but what do you guys think about that?
Well, you go ahead, Richard.
She definitely trusts him now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like you said, the body language is completely different. It's more of a friend to a friend kind of conversation, but like instead of, you know, commander or admiral and captain. But it's definitely the atmosphere of the whole entire conversation is. I mean, she understands where his moral compass is and what he'll probably do and all that kind of stuff. And she's just basically telling him, "Hey, this is what." And it seems like Nechayev and him are on the same, I guess, moral compass path or something like that, or at least I would hope so. Mm-hmm. Or at least that's what it seems like, that they're both on that same kind of path. Like, this is what I would do if I was in your shoes, sort of thing. So I understand where you're coming from, but this is the hard part about this conversation. And here you go, sort of thing. So
yeah, and I kind of think all along that she's been sympathetic to his point of view and shares a lot of those, you know, ways of thinking, and has tried to work to get things done. But, you know, if Starfleet Command gives an order, she's just going to follow it. So yeah, I think at this point, over the course of, I don't know what it is, like a year and a half or something like that, as they've worked together, and who knows, maybe they've worked together more than we've seen in just those 4 episodes. They've really gotten to know each other well, and they work together. And Nechayev is very, what's interesting is, you know, this aired shortly after that Deep Space Nine episode, and she's very kind of sympathetic to the Maquis situation in this episode. And she says, like, "Believe me, if I were living that close to the Cardassians, I'd keep a phaser under my pillow too," right? Whereas in the appearance with Sisko, it's like the Maquis are irresponsible hotheads. Just talk to them. And, you know, maybe like from the experience, like the aftermath of what happens in that episode, and since then, her point of view has changed a little bit. I find that really interesting, because her way of talking about the Maquis is quite different in that little interaction here.
It is indeed. And I think a lot of her attitude and body language in this episode also has to do with the fact that Picard did make her feel welcome. And so when she goes to the Enterprise, she now knows that she is welcome, and her attitude is completely different. She doesn't have to be so assertive to get her point across. And in most cases, like you said, she probably agrees with Picard, but again, she's got her orders. She has to deliver more orders, but at least she has the courtesy to deliver them face to face. I like that about her. It's like, yeah, it's not just somebody on a view screen that you never meet, never know anything about. She's an actual person. Yeah. And we find that out. It's great.
Yeah, and I like that too. And I think it's interesting because, like, when you have an interaction, like, I guess in Star Trek over a view screen, or, you know, even in a podcast remotely, it's different than meeting someone in person. Like, there's all kinds of different things you can pick up in a different type of interaction. And she's clearly the person that's like, to get a complete read on this situation, I need to be there in person. And she does that like every time. And I like that a lot, because you do see other admirals where it's like, all right, you know, get it done. But I get the sense that when you see her, she is, you know, the admiral that's responsible for that sector. So she's probably not too far away, or maybe trailing the Enterprise looking for issues. But yeah, she's like, they might need me, and I might need to make a call here, so I'll just stay within a few light years. I don't know. But it seems like she's kind of the admiral for that sector, as opposed to being an admiral at command that's headquartered on Earth. So maybe it's more possible. But I do like that kind of personal touch to things. So, yeah. Well, and that is her last appearance on The Next Generation. It was, you know, the second to last episode of the whole series. But she did make one more appearance on Deep Space Nine, which we'll talk about.
Well, I don't know if it's an appearance.
Well, okay. The actress Natalia Nagulich appeared as a version of Admiral Nechayev.
There you go.
Okay, how's that?
There you go.
And it'll be interesting to talk about that. I mean, I want to talk about it because it is Nechayev appearing, but spoilers if you haven't seen it. The Search Part 2, but it's really an illusion and not her. So that was Season 3, Episode 2, aired October 3rd of 1994. So maybe we'll just talk about that a little bit, because, yeah, it does turn out, I mean, you don't know when you're first seeing it, but it does turn out that this is an illusion by the Dominion to trying to figure out if their strategy will help to kind of take over Deep Space Nine and Bajor. And what's interesting in this episode, I think, is that Nechayev is portrayed as someone who, you know, is kind of cozied up to the Dominion representative and is like, we're just going to do this. You got to get it done. And it makes Sisko like really angry. And like the only thing that I think about is like, okay, so based on Sisko's, I think, only interaction before, does it seem plausible that she would be like this to him? Because I think for us, like seeing her in The Next Generation, it seems a bit off, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
More than a bit. Okay. Quite a bit. Huh. Okay. But you didn't think this is an illusion because you thought it was just like a changeling or something. Okay.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, at first I thought I never.
Mm-hmm. And she was the person in that other episode that didn't understand what it was like on the frontier, right? So he could probably be like, oh man, you know, this admiral is totally out of touch. I can't believe she's doing this. And he would kind of believe the illusion. Whereas us having the previous knowledge of what she's like on The Next Generation would be like, yeah, I'm not so sure about that. So it's one of those interesting things where we as the audience, I think, are a little more clued into it than the character that's participating, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you know what the sad thing is? Like, I took a look at this and compared, the number of scenes and lines. Like, this is her biggest role in Star Trek.
Is it? Oh.
And it's an illusion, because I think she's in like 4 different scenes. She gets, a bunch of lines. It's probably twice as much as the nearest competitor, because she's usually in like 1 or 2 scenes. But this is actually her biggest role. And it just makes me think like, oh, I wish that we could have seen her more on The Next Generation or on Deep Space Nine, because she really just got a few appearances, and like the most fleshed out appearance isn't really her, and she's not acting like she would. So it's kind of ironic.
I would love to see Picard in this simulation and just see what you know what I mean, like be like oh no, we're not even gonna touch the Federation, forget that. It's like no way, these guys are just hardcore bloodthirsty people. No, just
I mean, yeah,
I would love to see it.
Imagine if as part of that simulation, like Picard was coming as a Federation representative, and we see him and we're like, what's Picard doing?
He's like, the person we need to kill first is Picard.
But okay, but that would have been really interesting, of course, because at the beginning of the series, Sisko basically blames Picard for the death of his wife, right? So like, what if Picard came back in the simulation, and he might have every reason to think that Picard would do something terrible like that, based on his past experience. Because so that's the interesting thing. I think Sisko has a very different view of Picard and, the world we see in TNG than we might, being a part of the show. So, or being, thinking of TNG by itself. So it's just like an interesting kind of way of like a variation on the character. So I like that she was in DS9, and we can talk about the comparison, and there's some things that continue forward a little bit, but definitely her strongest performances are in The Next Generation. Yeah. But okay, so let's actually go around with a few final thoughts now that we've talked about all of the 6 episodes that Admiral Nechayev was in. Richard, your final thoughts?
Thinking back to when I was a kid, and then comparing to now, and then even this conversation, I find that I guess I quickly judged her in not saying anything, but yeah, I guess I fell into that little stereotype of the assertiveness of women back then. It must have been, or maybe I just don't like her. Period. I don't know, or at least back then. But yeah, talking about her now and thinking about what was going on around that time, it makes sense on her the build of her character and whatnot, and it definitely shed a brighter light on those dark parts of her character. So I really am glad we had this conversation, because it really puts a better insight on her, and yeah, I would love to talk to her now. Come to think of it, I should have talked to her at Star Trek Las Vegas. Yeah,
like Justin did.
That's
yes.
right.
Yeah, listeners, if you haven't heard it, on episode 200, there's an interview I did with Natalia Nagulich at Star Trek Las Vegas. Oh,
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's only like 8 or 10 minutes, but it was fun because she had some interesting perspectives about the character, about working with Patrick Stewart, and about working with Avery Brooks, and all the stuff that she has going on now. So, yeah, that was great to talk with her. Actually, let me give my final thoughts next. So yeah, I think the first time that I saw The Next Generation, I don't think I quite liked Nechayev, because she was somebody that would come in from the outside and felt like giving Picard a hard time with things that he was struggling with. But I've come to appreciate her character a lot more, and also that she is, one of those admirals that never gets like co-opted by an alien force, isn't corrupt or out for power. She's basically doing her job and doing it well, even though some of those situations are really difficult to give those orders, and she recognizes that, and she tries to do some things, on Picard's behalf. So I think she's doing a good job at what she's doing. And like sometimes, okay, to make a comparison to Deep Space Nine, I mean, sometimes people talk about Admiral Ross on Deep Space Nine as being like a good admiral, not a bad admiral. But there is one episode where he's kind of in cahoots with Section 31 that makes you wonder, right? But like when you see Nechayev, she like is that admiral that like there's not even like a hint of corruption, or she's out for power, or she's kind of dealing with these dark organizations or anything like that. She's just there to do her job, and I appreciate that so much. And I think she made a great impact, on Star Trek by being a part of it. I wish there was more appearances. I'm sure we probably get some appearances in the novels that I haven't read yet, but anyway, I've just come to a much greater appreciation. I'm glad we could take a look at it through this lens and kind of compare the appearances. I like that when we do that with characters and just kind of just focus on those characters and see how they move through the series, because I think we get quite a lot out of it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so Brandy, what are your final thoughts?
Well, first of all I can think of now is doing it and doing it and doing it well. Because doing her job and doing it well. That's how that song just automatically started playing. Sorry. Anyway, I liked Nechayev from her first appearance, and she grew on me as a character throughout the rest of her appearances, to the point where I knew when it was not really her. And I feel like, as far as her motivation for being an admiral, is really the protection of Starfleet and the Federation. I think that is her number one priority. And how refreshing to have an incorruptible admiral. It was just really great. And representation matters. It was great for 19, 20-year-old me to see a woman in that level of power on Star Trek who wasn't being talked about as being a shrew or whatever behind her back. I mean, maybe they did I would hope that they didn't actually do that. And, you can imagine, well, maybe some of the lower crewmen was like, oh, Admiral Nechayev, she's, But I appreciated that we never saw any of that really on screen, because that was really important to me. Yeah. Because, at that age, I was starting to realize, I am treated differently than other people. Okay. This is what the real world's like. Got it. So she is forever one of the highlights for me of Next Generation, because her performance is great. I love the actress. And talking about her today has, again, just made her even much more dear to me. So really enjoyed this.
Oh, very nice. I mean, and also the thing it makes me think about is that, Picard had to take orders from her and follow them or do his best, because like he struggles with it, but I don't think he ever tries to really subvert it like, Nechayev, I'm going to refuse her order. And any tension that comes up, you get the sense in the dialogue, even when he's talking with Riker, that the tension and the difficulties are because she's an admiral. Not because she's a female admiral, just because she's an admiral, right?
Yes, mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter who it would be. It's because of that, being an admiral, that she's a pain for him.
And that's appreciated. That's appreciated very much by me, yes.
Yeah. Well, Brandy, it's been wonderful having you on Earl Grey today. So let our listeners where they can find you out there.
Oh, I would be happy to. And thank you so much for having me. I was super excited for this. So I love Next Generation. You can find me on Live from the Edge, which will air Monday nights, the day after an episode of Discovery, of Discovery has aired. And that broadcasts live on YouTube at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. I also do a podcast with my husband called The Dark Corner Podcast, where we look at pop culture and also some very odd things through a darker lens. And I do have a lot of colorful metaphors that I use in that show. So it is not for children or people who are offended by some colloquial swearing. And I'm always hanging out on the Babel Conference. Sometimes I comment. Mostly I lurk until I feel like, nope, I just have to say something here. And then I comment. And and who knows what other things you might hear about on Trek FM in the future. You never know where I might pop up.
Excellent. Well, it's been It's been really wonderful having you on today. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you so much. Especially, it's so funny because Amy is now traveling to her home state of Utah, and I'm already here and happy to not really fill her shoes, but to provide that third voice in her absence. I've made that drive more than once, and it is really boring. It is a really boring drive.
I did that a couple of years ago, going from Salt Lake City to Vegas, and
I
think I got a ticket. I got a ticket on that highway.
Yeah, my car loves to go 80. She gets really excited when we get in that stretch where, here, 80 is the speed limit. I'm going 85.
There you go. And then it drops down to 65, and the cop's right there, right after that sign.
Yeah.
I'm like,
I'm like super paranoid about that. So I'm always just like immediately slowing down, people riding my tail.
Yeah.
I'm like, buddy, there's 2 lanes here. You can go around.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to
when I got the ticket, it was night.
Yeah, that
I didn't
happens.
see him.
Yeah. That drive is hard in the daylight, but in the night, it's like, please just let me stay awake long enough to get home alive.
Yep.
So boring. Such a boring drive.
Well, it's been so fun talking about Admiral Nechayev, but that isn't the only thing we've been talking about here on the network. Here's what you might have missed elsewhere on Trek FM.
Previously on Trek.fm, Earl Grey.
Exactly. I mean, like Arsenal of Freedom, like there's plot A, plot B, and plot C, if you look at it. I mean, this episode really has a lot going because when I think of Arsenal of Freedom, I don't think of it as a Geordi episode, but yet we've just mentioned 2 really important moments with Geordi and him taking command and, building his character. So it's a great episode.
Stage 9, a podcast about the people who make Star Trek.
I mean, it's, there's a scene with a bear and Leonardo DiCaprio and, whatever.
As I understand it, it's not a pleasant scene. They're not high-fiving each other.
It's pretty intense, I wouldn't say it's unbearable, but it's pretty intense. Waka waka. Anyway.
The 602 Club.
For me, first of all, only being the second Star Wars book I've ever read, I like the difference of having a series of short stories and not just one novel by one author like the Claudia Gray book that I read, Leia, Princess of Alderaan.
The Edge, a Star Trek Discovery podcast.
Okay, so I'm reading this really great book that I recommend. It's The Ultimate Star Trek and Philosophy, The Search for Socrates. It's a collection of stories from all different authors, and it's been on my bookshelf for a year.
And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
Check out all these shows and join the conversation about your favorite corner of the Star Trek universe and beyond. You'll find us wherever you get your podcasts. If you're an Apple user, be sure to hit the subscribe button in the Apple Podcasts on iPhone, iPad, or Apple TV, or the desktop iTunes app to get the latest episodes as soon as they are published. And please leave us a star rating and written review.
If you're not an Apple user, we've got you covered as well. You can find our shows on Google Play Music, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Windows Phone, in most third-party apps, and you can stream and download the MP3 file from our website or grab the RSS link.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show, and there are many ways for you to do that. The best place to join the larger conversation is the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type Babel, Babel, into the search field on Facebook, and it should come right up.
If you'd like to send us an email, you can use the form on our website at trek.fm/contact. Choose to send to a show and select Earl Grey. That will come right to us. You can also find the network on Twitter at TrekFM and on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. So, Richard, where can people find you?
Well, they can find me on Facebook. I pop in here and there on the Babel Conference. And they can also find me on Twitter at xransom, talking about my brand new dog, Trigger. So, Justin, where can they find you?
Well, you can find me on Twitter. I'm at TrekFan4747, where I tweet about nothing but Star Trek. Currently tweeting out my Season 4 rewatch of The Next Generation. And you can also find me hanging around the Babel Conference on Facebook.
If you'd like to help us keep all of our shows coming to you each week, you can become a patron on the network on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/TrekFM. That's patreon.com/TrekFM to get all the details. Perks include early access to episodes, exclusive content, producer credits, and more. Available through our special patrons website, the Patron Zone. It requires a great deal of money to produce, host, and distribute these shows each month. We really appreciate any support you can give us and hope that you'll join the team. Again, you'll find all the details at patreon.com/TrekFM. We'd like to take this opportunity to recognize our current associate producers, Norman Lau, Justin Ozer, and Michael Huter. Thank you guys for supporting us, Earl Grey.
So join us next time for another cup of Earl Grey.
Today is a good day to die!
Things are only impossible until they're not.